Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Straight Science. Straight Science is an evening science seminar series put on by University of Alaska Fairbanks Northwest Campus and University of Alaska Fairbanks Alaska Sea Grant. Both Northwest Campus and Alaska Sea Grant, we are public servants of the Bering Strait region. We serve all peoples of the region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, St. Lawrence Island Yupik, and Central Yupik peoples. So tonight we've got a good straight science ahead, and it's going to be very interesting to find out about cruise ships in Nome. And I'm especially curious, being kind of marine oriented, what our speakers, Jim Powell and Michele Remer, found. So Jim Powell's going to start it off for us first. He is an assistant professor, recently retired from the University of Alaska Fairbanks Southeast. That's down in Juneau. And then Michele will, do you guys want questions at the end or in between?
No, in between's good. Sometimes it's good,
Okay.
or anytime. Don't hold your.
Questions anytime. And then bringing it home will be Michele Remer, and she
Yeah.
is a PhD candidate at Michigan State University tonight, coming to us from East Lansing, Michigan. So an extra shout out, Michele, because you're on a completely different time zone, and it's got to be late
Yeah,
already where you are. So we really appreciate you taking the time. I think Jim's in the Captain Cook Hotel right now in Anchorage, so he's on Alaska time. But Michele, thank you so much for taking the time, the extra time, to talk to us about the results.
yeah,
So,
no problem.
so with that, I guess I would say we all want to know the results of your 2023 to 2025 work that you did on tourism in Nome and what you heard from both the Nome residents and the ship tourists. Take it away. Thank you so much, and we're glad you're here.
Great. Thanks, Gay. And thanks for folks showing up this evening. And I will proceed. I'm basically going to I'm talking from myself now, and the research that was done by um, other folks and myself. Um, and I'm going to say a little about this thing that we created because we had a lot of people going to know them. They were doing research, and I didn't want us to step on each other, and I didn't want to confuse the community. So we created this thing called the Nome Coordinated Research Consortium. And that's basically to tell people that, yeah, we coordinate ourselves sometimes, and we try to do the best we can as researchers and communities. But what you see in the slide are the logos from all of the universities that participated with us. And we have some of those folks even here. Bella and Michele were also part of trying to collaborate and doing our logistics and coordinating on the ground. So we didn't ask residents the same question three times or similar questions. So we really tried that. I'm going to talk a little about that. But first, I'm going to move. Oh, darn. How do I move forward? Maybe that. There we go. It's the arrow there that did it. Okay. Anyway, this is the team. This is the Fuller team. It was a National Science Foundation grant to look at 5 different places in the Arctic, and one was Nome. I'm in Juneau, Alaska. We get 1.7 million visitors a year. And we've had quite a few visitors for quite a few years. Back in the early 1990s, we started with about 250,000, and now we're up to 1.7. They figured that was last year, and we figure this year is going to be about the same, 1.7 million travelers coming in by big cruise ships, 4 or 5 a day. So I can talk about that too, but I'm talking about Nome. And so it was a nice comparison between a place that's totally, you might say, built out for tourism, as opposed to Nome that is not built out. And we looked at 3 other places in the Arctic to have a comparison to look at similarities and contrasts. We looked at a place called Bergen, Norway, Akureyri, Iceland, and Visby, Sweden, all places that have some degree level of cruise ship tourism. And we wanted to look at environmental issues to social issues to economic issues. And this was the team that we put together to do that. And we had people that either lived in the communities or had experience in the communities. Okay. And this is a summary of basically, I should say, three different meetings. Um, and we started, it's about, I don't know, 3 years in the process. We went back in this last April to do a town meeting at the church and to roll out what we call preliminary findings. So we did take there was interaction at that meeting too. Not many people, but we actually stumbled onto a different issue too. So that was a good meeting. Very few people, but very good conversations. So the research questions that we asked, and you can't get everything at once because you only have time. You have limited times, limited funds. So, but we wanted to know, how will Nome residents be affected by cruise ship tourism? What are the big issues in Nome? How did that fit into the issues of the day for Nome folks? And then what is the future of Nome and fitting tourism into that? Those are kind of the broad research questions we started with. Okay. Then who did we meet with? Well, we had these public meetings, and we had about 32 stakeholder interviews. And they consisted of folks from the Common Council members, and we interviewed almost all of them, including the mayor and city manager and the folks that make decisions, stakeholders. We had a few teachers, indigenous leaders, planning commission members, and city officials. And we had focus groups. We had indigenous focus groups too. So we think we had a pretty good, we reached, we thought, saturation. And that is when people start telling us the same thing over and over and over again on certain issues. And of course, you got to do one of these clouds, word clouds, and they're kind of interesting. It's not real quantitative stuff, but it is qualitative to see. This is really comes from the transcripts from our meetings that we had. We push that into a computer and it spits out this graphic. And the big words are the ones that are repeated the most. So people, port, government, city, local, community, subsistence, housing. You can see those things that are coming out are some of the big issues or the concerns or what was talked about in the interviews in the public meetings that we had. But before I go into those results, I just want to say a few words about before we got there. I started finding out that there are several independent research projects going on, at least three, and there's more, but just the ones that I knew on. And it seemed like, those projects weren't talking to each other. There was a lack of coordinated logistics, and there were similar questions. Some said, well, we're interested in the port. We're interested in some aspects of the mine. We're interested. It was all about kind of development of Nome. And then we had separate, because when we do research, we have to get ethics approval through what's called the IRB, which is a review board for ethics to make sure that our project is doing things ethically correct. All of us had separate approvals, but we didn't have a coordinated approval. So we got in trouble and, we paid our penance over about a year, it seemed like, going back and forth. But these are all research, these are all experienced researchers, but they never ran into that issue before. So, but anyway, so we figured that out and we moved forward with NSF and also our ethics boards. So we organized ourselves into this. We call ourselves. It's really informal, but it was a way to coordinate ourselves on the ground, and that's all it was. And it might be more, but it really led to some good things, like this evening. We coordinate ourselves. Who's giving presentations to the public, and so this is even is an example of coordination. Michele and I both were doing research on different topics, but in the vein of tourism. So why not do it together and people can learn from both of us at the same time and ask questions of us. So anyway, these are the things that really were netted. The community, and there was more interdisciplinary learning amongst ourselves. We had meetings ourselves and we learned from each other as researchers. We coordinated our logistics with probably some efficiencies. We rode on the, we rode, together. We did interviews together. We did some design stuff. We even had a presentation by a state legislator to tell the out-of-towners what, what is Alaska, because Alaska has, as you guys might know, has ANCSA, which is a totally different federal law that was passed in 1971 that set up a different system for indigenous people in our state as opposed to the lower 48. What about that? What about ANILCA? What about all these things? So we actually had a couple training sessions for the out-of-towners, the researchers. Um, so we coordinated our interviews and our listening groups, and we got a positive response from the community. They appreciated that. They weren't getting what we call uh, research fatigue, interview fatigue. We cut down on that. So we had like 4 or 5 people in interviewing one person. It was kind of odd, but it was a lot more efficient, I think, for people's time. So, and I think that it helped minimize kind of the confusion rather than going into a room and somebody saying, "Oh, are you from that group?" Or who are you? So we put together a one pager that explained who we were, and I think that helped as far as on the ground gathering data. So we put that together. So I've put the results of the interview into 6 overarching themes, and this comes from the transcripts and the interviews that we did. Um, and these are kind of the highlights of those transcripts. First, there is a lot of concern about the port expansion and increased tourism. And these are the big things. I mean, it's no, it's like, and if you walk, if you're in Nome, these aren't big new ideas, or you know about this, but it's interesting to hear it and it resonates. And yeah, it is an issue. And that is, right now there's a problem with housing in Nome. What's that going to do? Is that going to exacerbate the current level of the infrastructure that you have? If you get, more cruise ships, what are they going to do? There's a shortage of affordable and accessible housing. And at the airport, if you fly into Nome, you know that airport's pretty small. And what happens if you start, and they've been doing that, it gets pretty crowded out there. So those are concerns. What about that? It's going to make a situation that is that is stressed right now even worse. What about that? Are you going to do something about that? Are you going to increase the capacity? Where are you going to come up with the money to do that? Is Alaska Airlines finally going to remodel their airport to address capacity? Communications. This came up quite a bit. There were responses that that we don't get enough information from City Hall. There's information uh, deficit, and it's insufficient and transparency in the decision making. They've made that decision, but they didn't tell us about it. So I would say that, and it's never perfect. You never do enough as a city manager. You just you keep working at getting the word out, but things move pretty fast at the local level, and so I have a bit of empathy for them, but uh, they've got to do better, especially when they're building the port. And if they get more tourists, how many are they going to get? When are they coming? That needs to get out there, and it needs to be blasted to the community in whatever way through your radio stations that you have. The paper is really good. You have one of the best small papers and the oldest in the state. I think they do a great job, but it needs to get out. Communications is a lot of concern about that. And then I put it as who decides. Um, I could tell you about detail about some of the interviews I had, but that usually comes up right away from people that I interviewed that weren't the city council members, but were residents or other people. It seems like there's a lack of clarity of who and how decisions are made. There's a need for more indigenous input in agencies and committees. It's a lack of federal agencies concerning the number of federal issues and activities. I'm sure Gay is has talked about that. I mean, the Bering Strait in the future, I mean, are we going to wait until things happen to start staffing up more in Nome, or, until um, something dire happens? Um, so that came up too. Who and do we have the capacity to, as far as agency, the governance pieces in place to take on a lot more tourism? So that's three. Then the last three, who benefits always comes out. Um, and I should say that I've been studying tourism from at least the 1990s when I was on the city council, the city borough assembly, I should say, in Juneau. I was on the borough assembly from 1995 to 2004. I was deputy mayor of Juneau. We started with the issues back then on cruise ships. We were the first community in Juneau to pass a passenger fee for $5 because we knew that we were, our infrastructures were getting hit. Our streets, now we have crossing guards that are paid out of the passenger fee. And the state got into it. They always, why don't we pass something? We need some money too. So they passed, it was under a student, citizens initiative that had other aspects to it. That's another story. But it did pass the fee because everybody wants the tax that somebody else pays, of course. And so that was the one that the cruise ship folks, the passengers would pay. So, but who gets that money? And who gets, how can that money be best used in your community if and when more cruise ships show up? How is it going to be used? Right? Because there's a lot of potential. We've heard this. There's a lot of potential for more cultural tourism, a lot of potential for business opportunities. And can residents somehow use some of that money, perhaps to fix some of the infrastructure that's getting old in Nome? Um, anyway, so that came up a lot. Is who, where's that money going to go? Where does it go now? We get some dock fees. Who benefits? We want to be clear on who benefits if more people come in. And number five, this came up quite many times, especially by the indigenous peoples that we've interviewed. But subsistence activities and research and resources. There's concern about those subsistence activities that you already have, um, and that you are very accustomed to. Are they going to be impacted somehow? And what's the planning and what are the precautions are you going to put? Are you going to put some guide rails on that at all? Is there going to be a code of conduct like some communities do, or best practices that are in place by for charter folks that take people around your town? Are there codes of conduct, for example? I think those are wise, and in other communities do that. Then last, culture. Um, do you want to be a tourist town? I mean, who are you? Do you want to keep or um, do you want to keep Nome's cultural life the way it is, or do you want it to change? Because it will change. And this the last day I was in a meeting with 8 different communities on the west coast of Alaska, small communities, the Chicknicks, the Lagoon, Chicknick Bay and Chicknick, Gamble, St. Paul, um, Prairieville, and I'm missing one. But anyway, we were all talking about tourism and whether they want it and how do they want it and what should they do. And my message is to make sure you get in front of it as much as you can, because once it starts, it keeps going, and it's like a train that's hard to stop. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but it's going to happen because you guys have something to give. And people, as population in the world increases and people and places become more urbanized, they will want to go to places that aren't urbanized. They'll want to be just on a piece of land that's got nothing there, and that will be special to them. And we've got a lot of that in Alaska, and we have very special cultural things that could be shared. But how do you do that? And I said, the first thing, and this is what I've learned, and we've talked about too, is that you need to come up with a plan. You need to come up with a plan in case and when tourism comes. So there should be a tourism plan in place. And and people would talk about that a little, like, do we have a plan for this? What are we going to do? And it's all suggestive of, what are our values? Where do we want the people to go when they get here? Where do you want them not to go? Is as important observation. Additional comments. Of course, there's always the economy. Um, there was a lot of desire to, sustain the positive impact on local people. I mean, of course, that's one of the payoffs of having, people coming into your community, is the economic diversification. In Alaska, we don't have highly diversified economies. Juneau is a little different that way because fortunate we have a state capital, we have some mining, we have fisheries, and we have tourism. But other communities, like the ones that I was just telling you I was working with, they're looking forward to that, especially with the fluctuations in fisheries. And this could be augmented or help diversify. Anyway, so the port expansion is anticipated to provide more jobs. Expanded will help provide economic opportunities too. That's the hope. That's the anticipation. Um, Other things, what about those jobs? Are those transient workers? We heard Nome already has a lot of transient workers in the sense for the hospital, for other jobs that take maybe highly educated people that live in Anchorage, but also, have jobs that are really pertain to Nome. And you have there's a housing high concern. Um, but the diversification, again, is a good thing. A strong economy is a diverse economy and can withstand and be more resilient through time. Prioritization of local hires, small businesses. How do you do that so that a cruise ship, some cruise ships are known to come into a town and actually own some of the businesses in town. So there's they call it vertical integration of an economic model. It's not horizontal in the sense that locals would have a lot of control. That lack of control is a real issue. You want to maintain control of the economy and how it works. You don't want them to own everything in town, once they come, like having, cruise ship shops that come and go, that close down during the summer, I mean, during the winter, but open during the summer. Um, yeah, so that was mentioned. Indigenous, their concerns was the lack of involvement in decision making. Uh, that came out a couple times. That transparency in decision making and the lack of kind of a balance of who's on your city council, your common council, you call it. All right, and I just put this in here at the end because it kind of came up at the end. There, and maybe Michelle's going to talk about it, I'm not sure. This is ivory sales. In our last meeting, the owner of the ivory shop downtown, wonderful guy, it's been in his family for a long time. They were talking about the inability to sell ivory to certain customers. So what we did was there are folks at George Washington University Law School now that are looking at ways of clarifying that and maybe moving forward on changing that law if that can be done. First, there's a research that needs to be done, or what are the laws? What are the opportunities of changing it at all so that ivory and the whole issue of not being able to sell it to everyone um, might be addressed through that. But that's just kind of an add-on that I did. And that's the end of me. I don't know where I am in town or in time, but hopefully I didn't run over. I'm very grateful to the whole community and to those that worked and were interviewed. We reported out in April at a public meeting, but we're going to be publishing papers probably, and we'll do another article in we'll call the paper so there's a nice summary of it in more common language. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jim. You're right on time. And if anyone has any questions, now's the time to write them in the chat or voice up. I know I actually have some questions and comments. How are you doing, Michele? You're good?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm ready
Okay.
if there's no
Okay.
questions right now. My video turns on. There we go.
Well, I'm glad to hear. When do you think, Jim, we'll see your final report? You had a lot of interesting things in your talk right there.
Yeah. It's a good question. Well, I mean, it takes a long time to get things published.
Sure.
Uh, we have uh we have one. This is probably maybe even more interesting to you. We're doing a paper on the 5 different communities, including Nome, and it's on environmental impacts. It'll compare the different impacts and also kind
Of
of the
tourism?
government part on tourism. Yeah.
Of tourism.
Tourism and environmental impacts and governance of the impacts. How are they, what are the authorities that regulate air, water, solid waste, and how is that compared through the different 5 different communities that we studied? And that should come out. I'm hoping we're in final throes of the draft right now. I'm hoping maybe next year, early next year. So we come back. I'm thinking, doing something public, next spring.
All right.
That's safe to say.
And hopefully we'll also get your report of the material you just provided us, because you had a lot of good points in there that it would be good to have in hand for the region.
Yeah, and you guys can have the PowerPoint. Well, this will be up on your straight science, right?
Yes, but it would be great to get a report of the surveys that you, some
Hmm.
sort of written
Yeah,
thing.
we did summaries of the meetings, and so that would go into more detail of the meetings
Okay.
themselves. So I can
All
send
right.
that to, yeah.
Okay, that would be wonderful. And then Meher, Meher, not sure how to pronounce your name, but you have a question. Your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. My name is Meher. My friends call me Nemo, though, just for ease. I'm a master's student at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and I'm also very interested in a somewhat similar project. And I noticed in the word cloud that you had presented, one of the words was mammals. So I was wondering what the local community is um, take was on tourism and in terms of marine mammal conservation, because I know bowhead whales are very important for the indigenous communities up there. So, yeah, I was wondering.
I'm chuckling because Gay could probably give you a better answer than I can. But the people that we interviewed, they were concerned about, you have a ship that comes in and it docks. And there are some, correct me if I'm wrong, Gay, I might have gotten that wrong in the interviews, but there are people that subsist and shoot um, um, some marine mammal seals right on the shoreline. And it's like there are activities that people subsist right there. So what are you going to do about that when you got people walking around? I mean, you need to designate areas, I think, and say
Mhm,
these areas are off, limits. You don't go there because there's subsistent activities that are occurring right now. And I
mhm,
think that's what needs to be done. You need to define those areas. I don't think it's been an issue. However, I did hear some things about tourists and muskox, and getting too close to the muskox that are in town. So there's just not an appreciate. People don't know to get off the ship. They're from mid-America,
mhm,
get off a ship and they think they can, tourists behave in really strange ways. Go into houses and they'll look into your windows. They'll think they're in a park.
mhm,
No, it's a community. We live here, you know, and so they'll do the behavior. There needs to be codes of conduct and behavior reminded. It's nothing sophisticated. It's very simple. Like, don't get too close to the muskox. Don't go down to the shore in this area. There might be hunting that is occurring. That needs to be laid out. Anyway, it was generally mentioned. Okay, could you
gotcha.
inform me a little more. I may be off on
Well, I
that.
think muskox are one of the things that people are hoping to see. Those are land mammals. I don't know if your mammals comment was marine mammals. We do have hunting, we do have harvesting. There has been issues in the past. Those are currently dealt with, but there's a lot of questions in the future. So please know, Jim, that as an you don't harvest while people are walking around. There's a safety issue there. So but there's other concerns. And also ivory sales is a issue with the federal government, and there are rules regarding export and import. And I think the cruise ship companies, and again, I'm speaking ignorantly here, but from what I can gather, the cruise ship companies are sort of explaining it very generalized on the ship. Do not buy ivory. It's too complicated federally. And that's a shame. There are rule books. There's lots of information for all the different countries and the people coming from countries. And it's very different who can import, and so forth, so on. And it's very laid out, and there's actually rules on that. So that's also a thing that's taken care of. And then last but not least, you had mentioned a head tax, I think is the slang for having a tax of people. And just so Nome people are understanding, we do have such I think there's a better word for it than head tax, but I'll just use that word. It's like a passenger fee. It has a nicer word, but we'll say for everyone who comes in and out of Nome on the port, there is a tax that goes into, hope I've got this right here, but that goes into an account for the tourists that can only be used to enhance, like having another porta potty on site or having signage this way to walk to town, that kind of thing. So that's actually something that the city of Nome has already for the rule book for the port. That's already how that money will be utilized. I don't think we're there yet. We finally have enough, I think, now to start to look at some of these things over the last few years on how to spend it, as far as I know.
It's up to the community to decide how they want to spend it. We were sued in federal court for how we spent it because the cruise ships thought that we went too far. They use this phrase, it has to be close to the dock. So then we went too far and we went to court. And now it was a good thing because they delineated in a federal court what you couldn't do, but it still needs to be
Yeah.
reviewed every year.
Yes, it's reviewed every year
Yeah.
under the port. I
How-
can't think of the right word, but it's under the port rule book for that particular tax. And
Right.
that's approved at the city council level. So very interesting. And I'd love to hear more. But I think we should probably let Michele get on there. Any other burning questions we can ask Jim or comment on and engage in discussion with him as well after Michele? If not, we'll let Michele take it away. We're so glad you're here, Michele.
Got to unmute there. I'm just gonna share my slides. I also wanted to say, we were talking about the ivory. I do have a few slides about that as well in my presentation, so can watch for that. I think it's kind of in the middle. But hi everyone. Thanks for coming to the Strait Science meeting today. Today I'll be sharing some results of the fieldwork that I completed over the past summer in my talk titled Cruising a Socio-Ecological Bering Strait, Local Impacts from Distant Tourism. So as you all are familiar with, up in the Bering Strait, reduced sea ice in the area will likely affect other parts of Alaska as the Bering Strait becomes a globally important gateway, allowing Russia and China to change to a more efficient sea route. This means that Alaska is becoming even more interconnected as vessel traffic continues to increase. So these maps are from one of our group studies where we found that marine areas designated as areas to be avoided were followed by vessels, and also vessels who use the strait more often are more likely to follow these rules, whereas those who only transit every few years are likely to not follow rules of established routes. Bella Block, who's also on this call right now, who was the lead author on that project, gave a Straight Science talk on these findings last year. So this means that ships that do not regularly transit through Alaska may be ones to watch out for the potential of spreading novel species. And so our group is based out of Michigan State University, and we collaborate with researchers at the University of Alaska Anchorage to understand how vessel traffic will impact the Bering Strait region with the grant that we received from the National Science Foundation. So we use a concept called telecoupling to frame our research, which is distant interactions between natural and human systems. And so Alaska is a really good place to study these telecoupling since most vessel traffic is crossing between countries. However, telecouplings can even be at the state level, so a cruise tourist traveling all the way from Juneau to Nome could potentially be considered telecoupling. And so I mentioned Bella's work previously, which you can read about in Marine Policy. And then another grad student on the project, Cindy Olivan, is studying how marine mammal habitats are impacted by vessel traffic. And she recently published a data set in the journal Data in Brief that has aggregated publicly available data of marine mammal occurrences into one general resource for anyone who is interested in looking into that to supplement their work. And then also Kelly Kapsar, the postdoc in this project, recently published a paper on viscous seabirds from vessels and conservation biology, if you're interested in looking into that at all. And then also for resource development, a past graduate student on the project, Ridwan Akagan, completed work on the Graphite 1 mine, which can be found on UAA's Scholar Works website, I believe, yes. And then all of these projects can be found on our website at arctictelecoupling.org, which I'll flash at the end. And then our website also has a story map that describes our work if you don't have time to read all those papers that I just listed. So my portion of the project is focused on the telecoupling of tourism, since that's the theme of the Straight Science talk right now, which has many positive economic impacts. So for example, birders across Alaska spent $378 million in 2016, which led to 4,300 jobs being supported. And the overall tourism sector generated $5.6 billion in the 2023-2024 season, providing a diverse source of income beyond potentially more extractive industries. So therefore, we were curious about the cascading impacts of increased cruise ships, specifically in Alaska. And a lot of other work on tourism has focused on how cruise ship is increasing throughout Alaska. And so even with these economic benefits, the cruise ships can put significant strain on communities and may result in negative environmental impacts. So as was mentioned in a past Straight Science talk, and I'm sure everyone already knows this if you're located in Nome, but I know we have some folks from outside Nome on the call today, but there will be space for 3 cruise ships in the future. And so this is an expanded opportunity for cruise ships to visit Nome, as Jim talked about in his talk, and then the new port will also likely incentivize more visitors to disembark off the cruise ship and increase the amount of time that they are ashore, as the current setup only allows for one tender, which is this boat down here, to come ashore at a time. And so visitors who may not be willing to pay to come ashore will also have that barrier removed. However, cruising through sensitive environments can also bring challenges. And so cruise ships can present concerns with overcrowding and landfills. And there's also the potential for tourist dollars to not stay local, but instead to flow directly to cruise lines. And then also from a human health perspective, it could potentially lead to introductions of more like illnesses to remote communities, and then potentially pathogens from imported food, which I learned about when I was down in Juneau talking to someone at the US Customs and Border Patrol. So ecologically, invasive species can also be introduced from tourists coming ashore or through biofouling. So biofouling is when species are introduced to a new area by attaching to the nooks and crannies at the bottom of a ship. And before I dive specifically into what a telecoupling is, since that's kind of a jargony word, I created this figure to show the most basic structure of the system that I study. So I kind of try to return to this whenever I start to get lost in the weeds of a complex system. So we can start with considering how cruise ships and airplanes bring tourists to visit Alaska. And then these tourists can potentially bring new species with them on their clothing or on their boots or other gear. But the cruise ships and airplanes that tourists and recreationalists travel on can also bring invasive species with them. And now back to what telecouplings are, which can, like I said, seem a bit complex. Because the problems facing the Bering Strait region are not just a biological issue, but also include social issues. And with the rise of globalized processes, considering distant interactions has become more important than ever. An example of the sending system for us would be wherever tourists are traveling from the world, while Alaska is the receiving system. And then flows connect the various aspects of the systems together. So this would be the flow of tourists along with goods and services in this instance. And then invasive species can also then flow with tourists as a spillover. Another spillover could be the impact on nearby search and rescue operations for tourists who are unused to the area. And then also the other aspects of the framework are agents, which are organizations or individuals within the system, and then causes and effects, which can also occur within each of those different three systems as well. So as for my part of the project, I'm focused specifically on understanding how tourism can bring both benefits and drawbacks to communities. And so a previous graduate student, Ridwan Akagun, conducted a business survey in Nome to understand how much tourism money is coming in. And the part that I'm leading focused on talking to tourists themselves. And so we surveyed cruise passengers in summer 2024 as a pilot to test our questions and methods, and then we carried out another summer fieldwork this past summer in 2025. So we currently have a paper in review at Biological Invasions from the 2024 survey, where we found that increased knowledge of invasive species does not necessarily lead to more people cleaning their gear while traveling. And so today I'll be presenting the preliminary results from the 2025 survey with the caveat that we may be receiving more responses from tourists via mailback. As summer's just starting a 3-week cruise at the end of August, and it takes a little bit of time for the envelopes to be mailed back to us. So our overall goal of this tourism project was to establish a baseline understanding of visitor spending, as well as to further our understanding on the telecouplings of invasive species. And so we wanted to gather economic data that would be useful to communities where we were surveying, and also to help us understand the intersection of these social and ecological impacts by considering visitor environmental values, as well as their knowledge and intended behavior surrounding invasive species. We also completed a few smaller studies on the potential for non-native species to spread at an ecological level. And so exploring these different sources of information can help us learn more about the system as a whole. And so to study these telecouplings, we chose a survey as our metric because tourists have a very limited window for when they can chat, as they're sometimes only on land for 4 hours at a time. They don't want to spend an hour of their time completing an interview. And so we found even completing a survey was sometimes a burden, as they wanted to focus on their vacation. So we made sure to keep it to under 10 minutes. And we had 4 survey locations in our 2025 field season compared to only 3 sites for 2024. So the first year we focused on Anchorage, Seward, and Nome, and then we added Juneau in 2025 to compare the larger cruise ship market of the Southeast with the smaller ones for the North. And so while we were in Nome, we also surveyed for non-native species in the port. And so across our response collection types, we're currently at a 49% response rate and have entered 684 valid surveys. We're still receiving responses from our last trip in August, like I said, so the results are preliminary. And we also left some surveys with the great folks at the museum and Nautic Gear in Nome, so we might also have a few more surveys coming in from them. So to collect the data, we set up our locations we bring new tourists to be in each of our 4 locations. And we had 4 modes for taking the survey: iPad, paper, QR code, or a paper with an envelope to mail it back to us. And we found that Nome was our site with the highest response rate. And even though we received 684 surveys on our survey platform, a large number of those tourists only scanned the QR code because we had a sticker incentive for them to receive after taking the survey. So a number of the surveys that said they were completed were actually kind of just skipped over most of the questions. So the number that have been completed that we're at right now is 590. And so for the economic section of the survey, we asked tourists questions about the activities they went on and how much they cost, plus the overall spending of their trip. We also had a question about which businesses they purchased a product from, but many had difficulties remembering the names of specific businesses, so we didn't include that in our results here. And so one of the questions that we asked tourists to answer was what products or activities did they pay for or plan to pay for during their trip. And so this is showing the activity cost across all of our 4 survey sites. And the black lines in the middle indicate the median cost of the activity. And so the most popular thing to spend money on, surprisingly, wasn't just restaurants and local transport, but was also wildlife viewing. So this likely means that, as we all know, viewing wildlife was probably the main motivation for most tourists visiting. A few of the other categories, if you're wondering kind of what was included in that people talked about, these included specific tours such as a motorcycle tour, a food tour, trolley tours, and whitewater rafting. And trolley tours is mostly out of Anchorage because that's where we intercepted a lot of tourists at. And then we did not include hotels for the cruise tourists as they stayed on board the ship, but we do have some data on what kind of accommodation airline tourists stayed in because at some of our other locations, we also surveyed airline passengers. And so these are the activity costs for Nome specifically. And we did find that bird watching was low in our sample because we surveyed in Nome from June to August. So we missed the window in May when most birders are traveling up to Nome. We also were set up at the museum and multiple festivals. So this could potentially have led to higher responses for those 2 categories as well. And I also wanted to make a note that these were all self-reported values. So some of these outliers may have been the reason for them being so high. And then also I wanted to mention too that the overall cost of a trip to Nome was $15,000, and then the cruise package cost was $12,000. And then I forgot to say this, but it was, as you probably read, but it was compared to $10,000 for overall and $5,000 for the cruise for all of our survey sites. So a little bit more expensive to travel up to Nome, as you can imagine. And so while we were at the Nome community meetings earlier this year, we heard from someone who was concerned about ivory trade laws restricting tourists' ability to bring in marine mammal products, like Jim was talking about earlier. So these laws were originally created to stop the poaching of African elephants, but several US states also passed laws banning the ivory trade in general, which violates the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And this act allows indigenous peoples to sell ivory handicrafts made from marine mammals procured through subsistence. And so you can go to walrusivory.org to learn more about COERC's work on this matter. So because of all of this, we asked tourists on the survey if regulations prohibited them from purchasing marine mammal products in their home country. And so the darker states indicate more people saying yes to this question, while darker states in the map on the bottom indicate states where more respondents said no. So next, we compared states that had a blanket ban on all ivory products, as these states may not be familiar with the Federal Marine Mammal Protection Act. So these states were ones that had put bans on that were technically in violation of the federal law, but these states included California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, New York, and New Jersey. And so the bans were originally meant to stop the poaching associated with the elephant ivory trade, since they were just blanket bans, but they had this spillover effect of creating a general atmosphere of distrust surrounding all ivory products. Like Jay mentioned about the cruise ships kind of telling people not to buy any of the products. And so for these results, we were focusing just on mismatches that occur between those who know the regulations and those who don't. And so those who answered no to regulations prohibiting them from buying products could inadvertently be violating a state law. So this map up at the left. But particularly concerning for artists, though, is that those states that do not have a state ban within their state, a significant portion of respondents believe there to be a law preventing them from purchasing marine mammal products when there actually was none. And so this difference in knowledge for Nome was even more concerning, as there was over 5 states where respondents believed they would be prosecuted for purchasing these products when in fact there was no law preventing them from doing so. However, this is kind of a changing policy landscape right now because some new acts were recently just proposed, or a new act was recently just proposed in the Senate that could counteract these state bans. But since there already is this kind of mismatch in knowledge, there's going to still need to be more education done, even if that law does get passed. And so now, when we did this survey in 2024, we had a lot more international respondents because there was a cruise ship from Germany in town at the same time that we were doing the survey. However, we were only surveying ships that had majority Americans on them when we asked the question this year. And so this meant that we didn't have as many international respondents as we were anticipating to answer this question. And so most international regulations either prohibit all ivory from being imported or makes it very difficult to bring ivory back into their countries. So in particular, island nations like Australia and New Zealand have very strict rules. And then most countries allow the import of marine mammal products with the CITES permit, but this can take a long time for approval. And so this will likely require more coordination with cruise lines when tourists book their tickets to be viable. We've actually been working with researchers at GWU to further address this further, and the consortium is still working to address this a little bit more. And so now for the socio-ecological related information, we were interested in how visitor behavior can be influenced by different factors to either increase or decrease the risk of spreading new non-native species. And so before we can assess risk, we need to consider what can lead to behavior that mitigates new introductions from occurring. So we developed a model to consider how these values and knowledge can play into intended behavior, and then also how this could potentially lead to a change in actual behavior. And so applying this model takes more statistical tests. So I'm just showing the descriptive graphs that we've generated so far. And if you want to continue following this area of research, just send me an email and I can keep you posted on the results. So from looking at these descriptive statistics, we can tell that environmental values of survey respondents are in largest agreement that tourists are paying attention to wildlife. And this matches the economic data as well. Since 71% of tourists also purchase a wildlife viewing tour, and then the area in which they disagree most is with finding a vacation spot in a remote wilderness area. So a caveat to this data being mostly positive is that past studies have found a positive response bias from tourism surveys, since people are generally more positive when on vacation. And then also 51% of tourists rejected our survey, so non-respondents may have had lower environmental values than others who stopped to take a survey while they're on vacation. And so this is a composite of 6 questions that constitute our invasive species knowledge scale. Overall, we found there was low levels of knowledge among people traveling to our intercepted locations, with the lowest being that people did not know about the invasive species in the region they were visiting, but the opposite was true for knowing invasives in their own local area, demonstrating that our survey sample may be more engaged locally. And so for intended behavior, we presented tourists with the question of how likely are you to engage in the following behaviors? So we arranged the response options in order of the least intensive option, engaging with articles on social media, and then donating money was seen as a medium level of commitment to removing invasive species, while volunteering to remove invasive species required the largest time commitment. And so even though there's a slight difference in respondents being more likely to do the least intensive options, the spread was pretty even. And so this was likely due to our survey sample being made up of older generations who may not use social media as much as younger generations. So future studies could address this question a little bit further. And so now the behavior question that we asked the tourist was whether or not the visitor cleaned their gear after using it previously. And so the idea here was that tourists who had used their gear previously in areas that had similar ecotypes could potentially bring in a new species that could establish a population in Alaska. And for the other category, for wondering kind of what's going on there, respondents had the option to write in what this gear was, but many left this section blank. But some of the other categories that they did include were cameras, luggage, books, toiletries, tents, waiters, and crafts. Overall, we found that the items of gear most at risk were tripods and walking poles, and then also bags. Most of the items categorized as other were not likely to contain seeds or pathogens, but equipment such as tents were also likely another source of concern. And then for ecological information, we worked with researchers at the Smithsonian's Environmental Research Center to monitor for non-native species in the Nome Harbor. We also collected seed samples, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to focus on the first part. So to learn more about this project and to see the Smithsonian's results across the state, you can go to this link here. It's called Plate Watch to learn more about this project. And so the protocol includes preparing small PVC plates that are weighted down by rocks or bricks, and then you tie them to docks, place them in the water to see what organisms grow on the bottom. And so the protocol also dictates that the plate should be left in the water for at least 3 months, but for Nome's cold water temperatures, it is ideal to leave them in for longer. So in 2024, we tested salinity, and all sites were at sufficient salinity for a marine species to grow. So we were unable to leave the plates in the water long enough though, and then also wave action caused some of the plates to become snagged under rocks, so we couldn't retrieve them. So we didn't have anything interesting growing on the plates in 2024. And then this past summer, we were unable to test the salinity, so we thought potentially the absence on some plates may have been due to freshwater mixing. However, there was an identified barnacle that did grow on these plates, suggesting that salinity was high enough for organisms to settle on the plates within the Nome Harbor. We do believe that this barnacle was native based on its structure, but we were unable to bring a sample back for testing in the lab. And I just wanted to give a plug because our group does not currently have the funding to continue this work. So if you're based out of Nome and you're interested in seeing what marine species are in the harbor, please reach out to me and I can get you in touch with one of the Smithsonian's program coordinators so that we can keep collecting data before the port expansion. And then also I just wanted to give a plug for looking at terrestrial non-natives. The UAA Center for Conservation Science has a very useful interactive map and shows areas around the Bering Strait where non-native plant surveys have been completed. And then since we are still receiving more data, we plan on doing more beyond these preliminary results. So this includes using planned routes to match riskier routes from marine and terrestrial hotspots of non-native species. And then also future work that would be useful, even if it does not come from our group, is determining which cruise ships already have a biosecurity protocol in place, as we found that some of the expedition ships that go through Nome have strict biosecurity rules, but we didn't hear about this on some of the larger ships. And then lastly, we're looking to do more consideration of the business survey that I mentioned before in comparison with the economic data that we receive from tourists. And so my collaborators and I would like to thank a few folks who assisted with this fieldwork, as we could not have done it without all of their help, as well as all of the organizations that provided us funding to complete this work. And then there's our website down at the QR code, and take any questions that anyone has at this time. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was a lot of information.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, you got it. So this is the time that the Strait Science audience shows a little love for Michele and Jim in the chat. It's not easy ever to be a public speaker, and especially Michele. Jim and Michele did a great job, but Michele is doing it at what time is it now for you, Michele? You got to be
11:31.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so she's in the middle of the night. Take tomorrow off.
Good thing it's Saturday tomorrow.
I know. So anyway, thank you so much, because that's a lot to get going, and to do it so late. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
So and now, while you're getting your kudos in for the two, is there any questions regarding the cruise ship surveys or all that Michele had given us there, including Plate Watch? I put that in the...
Yeah, and I can go back to any slides too that people want to see.
Maybe just quick question. Do you have some anticipation how many, maybe I missed, how many cruise ships in coming years are going to go through the port? Some kind of distribution of...
Did you say how
Sure.
many ships are coming in the future?
That's the question.
Yes.
Okay. I know. So right now, Nome gets about 10 cruise ships a summer from what I've seen, looking back a few years. But like I said, they're supposed to have 3 new cruise ship berths once the port expansion is finished, which I don't know if that will mean a lot more cruise ships are kind of what the demand will be from the tourism side, because it does take them a lot of money because a lot of the cruises out of Nome so far have been expedition ships, and so those have been very expensive. But I think having these larger ships that have the option to now come right up to the harbor, it'll make the cost a little bit cheaper, and more people will be able to come to Nome. So I think that we'll be seeing an increase for sure. I just don't know what that if
Don't know how
it'll
much.
be filled up the whole time. So yeah.
But what's the worst case prognosis, let's say? Or best,
Sorry, what'd you say?
depending on the perspective. What's the highest prognosis? Do you have some kind of highest value? I don't know which probability is going to happen, but is there a highest value you can put out there and say this is going to be our ultimate scenario for the number of visits?
This will be the what scenario? I'm sorry, it's
Do
very
you,
Ultimate
do you know
scenario.
how many is the high end of cruise ships? What's the scenario going to be when it's the highest you could give us?
Yeah, I don't know what that number is. I'm sorry, I can't
That'd be
give that
hard.
to you. But yeah, Jim, I don't know if you have more
Yeah, there's
information
very
on your
many,
side.
there's so many factors. However, cruise ships do, they plan out in fact, someone told me the other day, they've already got, commitments for 2027 and 28. So people that do these cruise ships, they register very, in the future. So they're doing their schedules because the calculus of where those cruise ships go is pretty intense. How long they stay at a port, where do they go, what are the next ports? They have to plan all that out. But yeah, so it's hard to tell. And the other thing is weather. A lot of ports are dependent upon weather and wind. For example, one port in Sweden, over 20% of their scheduled docking, they don't dock because of wind, and that's in the Baltic Sea. Um, and because of these these ships are so high, wind is a big thing. They're like a sail. So anyway, there's weather to account for. So it's really hard to determine that. But
We
I
do
guess yes, it's a guess. It's a guess at this point. You know.
we do have a comment in the chat that says Robin Johnson would have a good idea. Also, Russian conflicts may have caused a reduction of ships. No? Robin, do you have any thoughts on where we're headed with the number of ships in Nome? If you want to jump on.
Hi, I can just refer to next year as far as knowing how many ships we're going to have. And there
Okay.
are fewer next year. I think we have 8 on the books and we had 12 this year. So it's not a big difference. I do believe in the future we will be seeing more just because the passage has opened up and there's a lot of interest there. But I don't believe we're going to be seeing more huge vessels like we see down in Southeast. More of the smaller expedition class type vessels.
Sort of that high end 500 people kind of thing.
Yeah, 500 is probably the biggest. I mean,
Okay.
we've seen the Westerdam come through, but as far as the regular clients, 250-ish is
Okay.
more of the average size.
All right, that's helpful
Yeah.
for my head. Thank you.
Yep.
And as far as the Russian conflict comment, I would say I haven't heard anything that would stop ships, tour ships. In fact, we're getting ships like Robin, you may know the Charcot group and the other ones that are coming over, and I think they're going more they're French, I think, French company. Is that right? Coming over?
Repeat the question, please. I'm
Well, the
not
question was, are we seeing a reduction due to conflict with the Russians, the Ukraine probably? So I think we've lost the tourism that goes from Nome to Providenia, but I think we're getting ships that are foreign. We're not seeing a lack of ships due to Russian conflict, or do we?
We did lose several ships when the
Okay.
Ukrainian crisis started. 2, I believe, 2 company names but it was a total of 7 visits that
Okay.
first summer.
All
And they
right.
have come regularly for years. And they haven't, I mean, probably 10 years prior to the Ukrainian crisis, and they haven't come since, obviously, because it's still happening. So,
Right.
yeah, we did lose
What-
7 the first year, and I imagine they would have been pretty regular clients had that if that wasn't going on.
Okay. And Jim just put in he put a little comment in the chat. We had perhaps nearly 20 ships scheduled with stops in Russia. So I learned something here. Thank you.
Correct.
Yeah.
I believe the year the Ukrainian crisis started, we had 20 ships on our calendar and 7 canceled.
So
So, yeah.
why did they cancel? What was, I don't understand
Because
why.
they were visiting Russian ports.
Oh, on the other, you mean
Yeah,
far
they were
east?
coming to America and Russia.
I can
Okay.
also speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think part of that is also the Passenger Vessel Services Act that the US has, that requires foreign vessels to dock at a certain number of like foreign and US ports. And so that kind of screwed with like the foreign vessel company that was stopping in Providenia. And so they would have completely altered their routes in addition to just skipping Providenia. So
All right.
that had a small influence.
Thank you, Bella. That's helpful. All of you guys, I learned something here. All right. And Michele put in her website in the chat. If we missed it, you can click on that and get more on her project. I did, I keep hearing this ivory, my ears go up. So I think there's some confusion if this is, or maybe I'm confusing, but what I think Michele was referring to is the United States state ban. There was bans in different state for importing ivory. That's a United States interstate issue that COERC's doing a great job of trying to address that and get people to realize elephant ivory, walrus ivory, two very different situations. But the other one where you'd mentioned the CITES. So the CITES is the acronym for, I had to look it up, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. That is an international agreement, and each country decides what they want imported and exported. So that's at the international level. That's when you get a ship that has people from Germany and they want to buy, and it's not just ivory. They want to buy sealskin mittens. They want to buy sealskin boots. They want to buy carving with a feather in it. So those are all very, very complicated. It's different than the ivory ban that's confusing elephant and walrus ivory. That's in the United States. But then for all the foreign tourists, that's under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service import-export. And they're dealing primarily, there's a couple other laws involved, but primarily with that CITES, which the countries themselves sort of come up with that, if that helps.
Yeah, and like just anecdotally talking to a few international tourists, even if they did have like a permit, they were a little nervous about buying
Sure.
any products because like they didn't want to get questioned when they went back into their home country at customs about like kind of what it was.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of it was just a general atmosphere of like they were really nervous, especially there was someone from Australia. He was like, we can't bring anything home, like it's an island, like they don't let us bring like anything back to Australia. So
Well,
yeah.
I think that it's not just ivory when you're talking about international travelers, and each country has different rules. So some countries do allow different things. And so it is really what I've heard that, and it's just me as a resident, nothing official. When I ask them, are you buying ivory? You should help support the subsistence harvest byproduct, right? And buy ivory carvings. We've got the best carvers in the world. And they're like, well, the ship told us no ivory. So then that makes me realize maybe the ship is not providing information. Again, I'm just hearing it as a person in Nome. And so it is complicated, but I think it really needs to be looked at. And it looks like there's comment in the chat from Jim Dory. Suggestion from Carol. Carol, you're on it. Ships coming up this way should be required to have at least one naturalist talk about ivory, and I would add all the marine mammal products that we utilize, not just the ivory. That's an attention one, but we have polar bear, hair, claws, bone, the whole gamut. Have at least one naturalist talk about ivory/subsistence that it explains the laws impacting ivory and provide info for passengers from various places, something like that. That's wonderful. I agree with you. That would be a really great thing, and have some of those guidebooks and guidelines, and have a very knowledgeable person on board, and maybe also educate our carvers, or provide information to our gift stores and things like that, so people can promote as well. So they're not scared, like Michele mentions, when they go home. Well, I'm not sure. I don't want to get in trouble. Because it's shame. It's just a darn shame. We need to.
Yeah, especially because, so I was talking to someone down in Juneau, I think actually Jim knows him, Ralph, who works for Holland America, Samuels. He was saying that like the demographics from like his what his cruise company has collected is that it's mostly like Americans who are cruising. And so I think focusing on like educating like Americans specifically, like I think Nome potentially has higher amounts of international travelers when it comes to some of the expedition ships, but I think it's important to also like focus on both. But technically, like educating Americans may need to be like the first step, just because they're the majority. But yeah.
And then I had another question. I don't see anything in the chat. Nobody's raised their hand. Budinsky, if you want to get some of Michele's stuff, I'm gonna ask her another question. Back on your survey, the Nome survey that you did, and it had the results, bird watching and wildlife viewing, although I put bird watching with wildlife viewing, I don't know. But
yeah,
had a large chunk of other.
Yeah.
What?
So
what was the other? Because you had some pretty good categories there, and I just wondered what. I am ignorant really of a lot of the tourist situation. I'm not involved in it other than as a resident. But what was the other that they were doing?
Yeah, so I think we had the option. So for this question, we had all those categories that you saw here.
I don't know if you could pull up your slide.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let me share it again.
Okay.
Right here, let me go back in presentation mode. Okay, so yeah, this box
there you
plot
go.
is
Other.
showing this other category. I was debating if I should just take it out altogether because it was really just like these 2 points here. And so one person apparently spent big money on other, and one person spent little money on other. But this way this question was designed too, it was a write-in option. And I'm pretty sure this person did like not write in specifically what their other is, but I'd also need to go back and check the data because I need to double check on what that specific person was spending money on. But yeah,
the sample size there is pretty small. So I was like, how big? Maybe there's something we all don't know. And
no. So that's why most of these are.
And then the other one
I was debating taking that out. So
if that's all right, if the dots represent an answer for restaurants and meals, look at that, way over in
that's why I mentioned like
Ooh.
These were self-reported. So I'm like,
where did they
potentially
eat?
Someone just hit an extra 0 when they were entering it on the iPad.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm assuming that's what happened.
I was like, wow. I mean, I know we're kind of pricey now, but that had to be on a golden plate.
Or maybe it was someone who, they just really spend a lot of money. Yeah.
So in the chat from Carol, it says, regarding birding, did you survey only cruisers, the cruise ship people? They don't have time for birding while they're here, and we have so many birders, and mostly in June, and they spend a lot, lodging, guiding, food, etc. Wondering how you weren't able to get that data.
Yeah, so like I said, we were only in Nome for like the second half of June after the birders had already gone home. Like we were down in Juneau for the first half of that month, and then we came up to Nome for the Westerdam ship that came, I think, June 20th. So yeah, we missed the birders, which we were hoping to get up there for when they were coming, but yeah, it just didn't work out with the timing of with our other field work. So
Could it have been also that just what Carol's alluding to there, that they just don't have much time to go birding if they're only in Nome for 4 hours or whatever was mentioned?
yeah, that could also be the case. But I think too, like what Carol was saying, like the birders are coming like earlier than when like the cruises are coming up. So like once the cruises get off, they like there's just not as much like birding opportunities from my understanding, but I could be wrong. So yeah.
All right. All right. Well, for Michele, you're going to see what tomorrow's like much faster than the rest of us because it's getting close to midnight where you are. But
Yes, it is.
any any other questions for Jim or Michele? Got a thumbs up there. All right. If not, we'll close. Maybe Jim and Michele, if you can stay awake, Michele, just a little bit longer, that would be great. And we'll let everyone go home. Next week, we are also going to have Straight Science on a Friday. That was by the speaker's design, based on their schedule. And we are going to have, it may be very appropriate timing. It's going to be called Coastal Freeze Up and Storms. Future impacts. And so this is a researcher who's been on before. They're coming up. Sekuliak is going to try to ride this thing. They are traveling up in the Bering Sea with all the lows that are underway. And for Jim and Michele, we have a really big one coming down on us by Sunday. Early morning, I think, is when that's supposed to hit. So everyone mind that and be safe. But Sekuliak is battling these storms and is expected to come. I don't know if they're going to be able to land, but they're expected to come to Nome on October 15th. They're doing they're taking a bunch of researchers on board and they will be traveling north, studying storms. I don't think they're going to have to go too far. And how that's affecting our coastline and freeze up. So that is next week on the 17th on Friday evening. So a week from tonight, and kind of apropos for all that's happening. With that, yeah, Jim and Michele, stay on, and everybody, thank you so much for coming and have a good night. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
Friday.
Thank you everyone for your questions.